My name is Rebecca Thompson, and I'm 34 years old. 2 weeks before my sister Madison's destination wedding in Italy, I discovered my family had forgotten to book my plane tickets despite promising months ago they'd handle everything. Standing in my Denver apartment, holding Madison's frantic text about seating charts, I realized this wasn't forgetfulness, but deliberate exclusion. My parents had booked tickets for everyone except me, claiming they assumed I'd handle my own. With trembling hands and a breaking heart, I opened my laptop and made a decision that would change everything. I didn't book a flight to Italy. I booked a hostel in Prague instead. Before we dive into this incredible journey of family betrayal and personal liberation, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a story about choosing yourself over toxic family dynamics. Make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell because trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. Now, let me take you back to where this nightmare really began. Looking back now, I should have seen this coming. The signs had been there for years, scattered like breadcrumbs leading to this moment of ultimate betrayal. I'd spent my entire adult life being the family scapegoat, the one who somehow always ended up on the outside looking in. Birthday parties where my invitation got lost in the mail, family photos where I was conveniently absent because I was taking too long to get ready, major family decisions where I was the last to know, if I found out at all. Madison's engagement was the perfect example. Instead of getting a phone call or even a text, I learned about my own sister's engagement through a Facebook post. There I was, scrolling through my feed during my lunch break at work, when suddenly Madison's beaming face appeared with a massive diamond ring and a caption about her perfect proposal weekend. The comments were already pouring in from family members, aunts, cousins, even our grandmother, all congratulating her and sharing in her joy. I was the only one who didn't know. When I called Madison that evening, she acted surprised that I hadn't heard. "Oh my God, Becca, I thought Mom called you," she said, but there was something in her voice that told me this wasn't an oversight. This was intentional. During that same call, she casually mentioned they'd already started planning the wedding, had already chosen Italy as the destination, had already begun looking at venues. Everything was moving forward without me, and yet somehow I was expected to just fall in line when they decided to include me. The false promises started at a family dinner 3 months before the wedding. I remember it clearly because it was one of those rare occasions where I actually felt included. We were all sitting around my parents' dining room table, the one with the burgundy tablecloth that only came out for special occasions, and Dad was in one of his generous moods. Harold Thompson had always been a man who liked to be in control, who enjoyed the feeling of being the patriarch providing for his family. "Don't worry, honey," he said, reaching over to pat my hand in that condescending way he had. "We'll handle all the travel arrangements as a family. This is Madison's special day, and we want everyone there without any stress about logistics." Mom nodded enthusiastically, adding, "We're going to make this so special, Rebecca. All of us together in Italy, celebrating Madison. It's going to be magical." I felt such relief in that moment. For once, I wasn't going to be left scrambling to figure things out on my own. For once, I was going to be truly included in something important. I even thanked them, told them how much it meant to me that they were thinking of everyone. Madison smiled at me across the table, and for a brief moment, I felt like I had a real family. What I didn't know then was that this promise was nothing more than a setup for the ultimate humiliation. While I spent the next few months assuming everything was handled, they were making plans that deliberately excluded me. They booked flights for Mom, Dad, Madison, her fiancé James, our brother Michael, even Madison's future in-laws. They coordinated hotel rooms, planned group dinners, arranged transportation from the airport. They did everything except include me. The phone call with Mom when I discovered the truth was a masterclass in gaslighting. Diane Thompson had always been skilled at rewriting history when it suited her, but this was beyond anything I'd experienced before. When I called her, my voice shaking with confusion and hurt, asking about my ticket information, she acted like I was speaking a foreign language. What do you mean, your ticket information? She asked, and I could hear that innocent confusion she put on whenever she was about to manipulate a situation. We never said we were buying your ticket, Rebecca. You're 34 years old, for heaven's sake. We assumed you'd handle your own travel like an adult. But Dad specifically said you'd handle all the travel arrangements as a family, I insisted, my voice getting higher as panic set in. I was sitting right there. We were all at the dinner table, and he said not to worry about logistics. I think you misunderstood, sweetheart, Mom replied, and I could practically hear her rolling her eyes. We said we'd coordinate our travel as a family. That doesn't mean we're paying for everyone's tickets. You're being dramatic, as usual. That phrase, as usual, hit me like a physical blow. It was her favorite weapon, the way she dismissed any legitimate concern I had by framing it as a character flaw. I was always being dramatic as usual, or sensitive as usual, or making things about me as usual. It was her way of ensuring that I could never have a valid complaint about how I was treated. The financial trap they'd set was ingenious in its cruelty. By waiting until 2 weeks before the wedding to reveal that I didn't have a ticket, they'd created a situation where I'd have to pay premium prices for last-minute flights. They knew I'd already requested time off work, had already made arrangements with my boss Jennifer Martinez to cover my responsibilities. They knew I'd look irresponsible and unreliable if I suddenly had to change my plans. But the worst part was discovering the group chat. Madison's best friend Sarah, who I'd known since high school, accidentally sent me a screenshot meant for someone else. It was from a family group chat I didn't even know existed, one called Italy Planning, and the screenshot showed a conversation from weeks earlier. Think Becca will figure out she doesn't have a ticket soon? Michael had written, followed by a laughing emoji. She's probably waiting for us to hand-deliver her boarding pass, Dad had responded. The victim complex is real with this one, Madison had added. Watch her make this all about her when she finds out. Mom's response was the knife that twisted deepest. Maybe this will teach her some independence. She's 34 and still expecting Mommy and Daddy to take care of everything. They weren't just excluding me. They were mocking me for trusting them. They were treating my legitimate expectation of being included as a character flaw worthy of ridicule. The people who were supposed to love me most in the world had turned me into their private joke. The phone call with Madison when she found out I knew about the tickets will haunt me forever. I'd expected some embarrassment, maybe an apology, perhaps even an offer to help figure out a solution. Instead, I got a level of cruelty I didn't know my sister was capable of. This is exactly what I was talking about, she screamed into the phone before I'd even finished explaining how I'd found out. Everything always has to be about Rebecca. I'm getting married, this is supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and you're ruining everything with your drama. Madison, I'm not trying to create drama, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I just want to understand what happened. Dad promised Dash. Stop living in Fantasyland, she cut me off. Nobody promised you anything. And, honestly, maybe it's better this way. Do you know how exhausting it is to constantly worry about your feelings? Do you know what it's like to plan a wedding while walking on eggshells because everything might set off sensitive Rebecca? The words hit me like physical blows, but she wasn't finished. You want to know the truth? I didn't want you in my wedding party anyway. Sarah Coleman is my maid of honor because she actually supports me instead of making everything about herself. She doesn't sit in the corner at family events acting like the world owes her something. She doesn't turn every conversation into how hard her life is. I was crying now, but Madison's voice only got more vicious. And another thing, since we're being honest. Do you know why we didn't tell you about the tickets? Because we all knew you'd find some way to make this difficult. You'd complain about the cost, or the timing, or the hotel arrangements, or something. There's always something with you, Rebecca. Always some reason why you can't just be happy for other people. When I managed to ask about being excluded from the wedding party, Madison laughed, actually laughed. Maid of honor was never even on the table for you. Sarah and I have been planning this since we were kids. She's the sister I chose, not the one I got stuck with. After I hung up, shaking and sobbing, I discovered there was more. The family friend Sarah Coleman that Madison had chosen as maid of honor wasn't just a random selection. They'd been planning this deliberate exclusion for months. Sarah posted a photo on Instagram from Madison's bachelorette party, a party I hadn't even known was happening, with the caption, "So grateful to stand beside my soul sister on her special day." But the deepest cut came when I found out about the money. During a phone call with my cousin Emma, who was calling to gloat about her invitation to Italy, she accidentally revealed something that shattered what was left of my heart. The money my parents had supposedly set aside for my ticket had been used to upgrade Madison's wedding dress. The dress she'd originally chosen was beautiful but simple. The one she actually bought, with my ticket money, was a designer gown that cost more than I made in 2 months. When I confronted Dad about this, Harold Thompson showed me exactly who he really was. "That money was never specifically for your ticket," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "It was money we allocated for the wedding, and we decided Madison's dress was a better investment than enabling your dependence on us." "Enabling my dependence?" I repeated, incredulous. "You told me you'd handle the arrangements." "I told you we'd coordinate as a family," he corrected, using the same twisted logic Mom had used. "Coordination doesn't equal payment. Maybe if you spent less time feeling sorry for yourself and more time taking responsibility for your own life, you'd understand the difference." Then came the ultimatum that revealed just how calculated this all was. "Here's what's going to happen," Dad continued, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used when I was a child being punished. "You're going to stop this victim act, you're going to buy your own ticket, and you're going to show up to your sister's wedding with a smile on your face. Or you can continue this tantrum and not come at all. But if you choose not to come, don't expect any sympathy from this family. And don't expect us to pretend you're the victim when you're the one choosing not to be there." The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. They'd created a situation where I couldn't afford to attend, then framed my inability to attend as a choice, a character flaw, a failing on my part. They'd set me up to fail and then planned to blame me for failing. But it got worse. Mom had called my workplace, speaking to the receptionist and claiming there was a family emergency that might require me to change my vacation plans. She was trying to manipulate my work schedule to make it impossible for me to travel even if I could afford it. When my boss Jennifer asked me about it, I had to explain that there was no emergency, that my mother was trying to control my schedule for reasons I couldn't even fully understand. The separate group chat was the final straw. Not only did they have the Italy planning chat that excluded me, but they'd created another one specifically for coordinating activities once they were there. They'd planned group dinners, sightseeing tours, day trips to nearby cities. They'd organized a complete family vacation around Madison's wedding, and I was the only family member not invited. Even my brother Michael, who I'd always considered my closest family member, had stayed completely silent through all of this. When I called him, desperate for one person in my family to show some sanity, he was coldly unsympathetic. "Look, Becca, I don't want to get in the middle of this," he said, which was code for "I'm choosing their side. Maybe you should just figure out your own way to get there if it's so important to you." "It's not about the money, Michael," I tried to explain. "It's about being deliberately excluded and then blamed for the exclusion." "I think you're reading too much into this," he replied, and I could hear his wife Kate in the background agreeing with him. "Mom and Dad aren't trying to hurt you. They're just trying to manage a complicated situation." In that moment, I realized I truly was alone. My entire family had decided I was the problem, and no amount of explaining would change their minds. They'd rewritten history to make me the villain in my own story, and they were all committed to that narrative. That night, sitting in my apartment with my laptop open, I made a decision that would change everything. Instead of frantically searching for last-minute flights to Italy that I couldn't afford, I started researching Prague. I'd always wanted to visit the Czech Republic, with its stunning architecture and rich history, but had never had a reason to go alone. Now I had the perfect reason: spite. But it was more than spite, really. As I scrolled through photos of Prague's cobblestone streets and fairy tale buildings, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: excitement about a choice I was making for myself. For once, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's plan or meet someone else's expectations. I was choosing something that would make me happy. The hostel I found was perfect, a highly rated place in the heart of the old town, specifically recommended for solo female travelers. The reviews were filled with stories from women who'd found confidence and adventure traveling alone. The price was a fraction of what a last-minute ticket to Italy would have cost, leaving me money for activities, good food, and experiences I actually wanted to have. When I hit book now on that hostel reservation, I felt a rush of liberation I'd never experienced before. For the first time in my adult life, I was choosing myself over my family's expectations. I crafted my announcement carefully, typing and retyping the message I'd send to the family group chat. Finally, I settled on something simple and direct. Hey everyone. Since there seems to have been some confusion about travel arrangements for Madison's wedding, I've made other plans. I'll be spending that week in Prague instead. Hope you all have a wonderful time in Italy. The response was immediate and explosive. My phone started buzzing with calls and texts within minutes of sending the message. Madison called first, her voice shrill with panic. What do you mean, Prague? You can't go to Prague. It's my wedding week. I'm aware it's your wedding week, I replied calmly. That's why I planned a trip for myself since I won't be attending the wedding. This is so typical of you, she shrieked. Making my wedding about yourself. Do you know how this looks? Do you know what people will think when they ask where you are? They'll think exactly what you tell them to think, I said. Just like you always do. Dad's call came next, and his voice was cold with authority. You will cancel this Prague nonsense immediately. I don't know what game you're playing, but this stops now. I'm not playing a game, Dad. I'm taking a vacation during the time I'd already requested off work. You're being vindictive and childish, he snapped. Your sister needs you there. No, she doesn't, I replied. She made it very clear that she doesn't want me there. Sarah Coleman is standing beside her, not me. Sarah Coleman went to the bachelorette party, not me. Sarah Coleman is in all the group chats, not me. Madison will be surrounded by people who actually want to celebrate with her. The threat started that evening. Dad called back with a voice so cold it made me shiver. If you go through with this selfish stunt, there will be consequences, he said. Don't think you can manipulate this family and then come crawling back when you realize what you've lost. What exactly will I have lost? I asked. Your inheritance, for starters. Your place in this family. Your relationship with your sister on the most important day of her life. Is your petty revenge worth throwing all of that away? It's not revenge, I said quietly. It's self-preservation. Mom's response was typically manipulative. She started calling extended family members, painting herself as the victim of my breakdown. Aunt Patricia later told me that Mom had called her crying, claiming I was having some sort of psychological crisis and needed intervention. Diane told me you're refusing to come to Madison's wedding and going to Europe alone instead, Aunt Patricia said when she called. She's worried you're not thinking clearly. Did she mention that they didn't book my ticket despite promising they would? I asked. There was a long pause. She said there was some miscommunication about that. There was no miscommunication, I said. There was a deliberate plan to exclude me and then blame me for being excluded. The workplace harassment escalated when Madison showed up at my office the next day. Jennifer, my boss, called me into her office with a concerned expression. Rebecca, your sister is here and she's quite upset, Jennifer said. She's asking to speak with you and making some concerning statements about your mental health. When I went to the lobby, I found Madison pacing like a caged animal, her face red and blotchy from crying. This has gone far enough, she said loudly, drawing stares from other people in the waiting area. You're embarrassing the entire family with this breakdown. I'm not having a breakdown, I said calmly. I'm taking a vacation. To Prague? Alone? Right when I'm getting married. Her voice was getting higher and more hysterical. That's not normal behavior, Rebecca. That's spite. You're right, I said. It is spite. It's also self-care. Madison's public tantrum in my office lobby was so disruptive that security had to escort her out. Mrs. Chin from my apartment building later told me that Madison had been asking questions about my comings and goings, trying to figure out when I'd be home so she could talk sense into me. The family's response revealed how calculated their original plan had been. If this had really been about miscommunication or logistics, they would have tried to solve the problem. Instead, they were furious that I'd found a solution that didn't involve begging them for inclusion. They wanted me to be devastated by their exclusion, to come crawling back and accept whatever scraps of participation they were willing to offer. But I wasn't doing that anymore. For the first time in my life, I was choosing my own happiness over their dysfunction. And they couldn't stand it. My friend Amanda Rodriguez was the only person who completely understood what I was doing. "Good for you," she said when I told her about Prague. "Do you know how many years I've watched your family treat you like garbage? Do you know how many times I've wanted to shake you and tell you to walk away? Why didn't you?" I asked. "Because you had to choose it for yourself," she said. "And now you have." The week leading up to my departure was like psychological warfare. My family launched a coordinated campaign designed to break my resolve and force me back into their control. What I didn't expect was how creative they'd get with their manipulation tactics. It started with social media. Mom began posting passive-aggressive messages about children who forget their responsibilities to family and the importance of being there for the people who raised you. Madison shared articles about narcissistic personality disorder with captions like, "Sometimes you have to recognize toxic behavior in your own circle." Dad, who rarely used Facebook, suddenly became active with posts about entitled millennials who expect everything handed to them. But the financial retaliation was more than petty. It was designed to cause real damage. I discovered my car insurance had been canceled when I tried to renew my registration online. Dad had bundled my policy with theirs years ago to save money, and he'd quietly removed me without warning. Suddenly, I was driving uninsured, which could have cost me my license if I'd been pulled over. When I called the insurance company, they confirmed that Harold Thompson had called to remove me from the policy, claiming I was no longer part of the family plan. The representative seemed confused by the situation, noting that it was unusual to remove someone without notice, especially so close to renewal. Madison's contact with my workplace crossed every boundary of professional and personal space. She called Jennifer directly, introducing herself as my sister and expressing concern about my mental state. "She's making some very impulsive decisions," Madison told my boss. "Our family is worried she might be having some kind of breakdown. She's planning this erratic trip to Europe alone, refusing to attend family events. We're concerned she might not be thinking clearly about her professional responsibilities either." Jennifer, thankfully, was smart enough to see this manipulation for what it was. She called me immediately after Madison's call. "Rebecca, I need you to know that your sister contacted me with some very concerning allegations about your mental health," Jennifer said. "I want to be clear that your work performance has been exemplary, and I don't appreciate family members trying to interfere with our professional relationship." "I'm so sorry," I said, mortified. "I had no idea she would contact you." "Don't apologize," Jennifer replied firmly. "This is harassment, and it reflects poorly on her, not you. I've documented the call, and if any family member contacts this office again, we'll be referring the matter to security." The extended family pressure campaign was perhaps the most painful part. Aunts and uncles who I rarely spoke to suddenly became very concerned about my relationship with my immediate family. Uncle Robert called with a long speech about the importance of forgiveness. Cousin Emma left voicemails about how hurt Madison was. Even my grandmother, who was 86 and rarely got involved in family drama, called to tell me I was breaking my mother's heart. Each call followed the same script. They were concerned about the family rift. They understood there had been some miscommunication, but surely I could see that missing Madison's wedding would be something I'd regret forever. None of them acknowledged that I'd been deliberately excluded. None of them questioned why my family had planned an entire trip without including me. They'd all accepted the narrative that I was being unreasonable. But the most revealing discovery came from my cousin Kate's husband, who'd had too much to drink at a family barbecue and accidentally told me the truth. The family had planned to humiliate me at the wedding in ways I hadn't even imagined. "Yeah, Madison was joking about seating you at the kids' table," he said, laughing. "Said it would be perfect since you act like a child anyway. She had this whole plan worked out where you'd be sitting with her friend's 8-year-old cousin." "What else?" I asked, keeping my voice casual while my stomach twisted. "Oh, and the photos. The photographer was specifically told not to include you in any of the formal family shots." Madison said she didn't want to look back at her wedding photos and see your victim face in every picture. The setup trap became clear when Mom called suggesting a family meeting at my apartment. She, Dad, and Madison wanted to come over to discuss the situation like adults and work things out before anyone did something they'd regret. "We're all concerned about you," Mom said in her most caring voice. "This isn't like you, sweetheart. This hostility toward your family, these impulsive decisions. We think you might benefit from talking to someone professional. You want to stage an intervention, I realized. We want to help you," she insisted. Sometimes when people are under stress, they don't make the best decisions. We love you too much to watch you damage your relationships with the people who matter most. I almost fell for it. For a moment, hearing Mom's caring tone, I almost believed that maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they really were just concerned. Maybe this could all be resolved with a conversation. Then I remembered the group chat messages mocking me. I remembered Madison screaming that she didn't want me in her wedding party. I remembered Dad using my ticket money for Madison's dress upgrade. I remembered every cruel word and deliberate exclusion. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "So you're refusing to even talk to your family?" Mom's voice immediately shifted back to cold disappointment. "You're so determined to be the victim that you won't even listen to people who love you?" The gaslighting was so intense it made me dizzy. They were rewriting history in real time, turning their exclusion and cruelty into concern and love. They were making me question my own memories and perceptions. But I'd found evidence that couldn't be rewritten. I'd seen the group chat messages. I'd heard Madison's cruelty. I'd experienced their manipulation firsthand. No amount of loving words could erase the documented proof of their intentions. When word spread through our small community about the family rift, Dad's business reputation began to suffer. Harold Thompson owned a small accounting firm, and several clients began questioning his character. If he treated his own daughter so poorly, what kind of person was he to trust with their finances? One client, Mrs. Rodriguez, Amanda's mother, actually fired him after learning how my family was treating me. "I've known Rebecca since she was a little girl," she told Dad. "She's never been anything but respectful and kind. If you can throw your own daughter away this easily, I don't trust you with my money." The community backlash seemed to panic my parents. They hadn't expected their private family cruelty to become public knowledge. They'd assumed they could control the narrative, paint me as the unreasonable one, and maintain their reputation as good parents dealing with a difficult child. But small communities talk, and people had been watching my family's treatment of me for years. They'd seen me excluded from gatherings, overlooked in conversations, treated as an afterthought at family events. When the wedding situation exploded, it just confirmed what many people had already suspected. The Thompson family had a scapegoat, and I was it. The morning of my departure was the most peaceful I'd felt in weeks. I woke up early, made myself a proper breakfast, and took my time getting ready. My suitcase was packed with clothes I'd actually wanted to wear, my itinerary was full of places I genuinely wanted to see, and for the first time in years, I was excited about the future instead of dreading it. I'd arranged for Amanda to drive me to the airport, partly for practical reasons, but mostly because I needed a supportive presence. As we loaded my luggage into her car, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced since childhood. I was choosing adventure over obligation, joy over duty, myself over their dysfunction. "Are you nervous?" Amanda asked as we drove through Denver traffic. "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But it's a good terrified. It's the kind of scared you feel before something amazing happens." "That's exactly how you should feel," she said. "You're about to have the adventure of a lifetime." What I didn't expect was the last-minute sabotage attempt. We were pulling up to the departure drop-off when Amanda's phone started buzzing. Then mine started ringing. Then we saw Madison running toward us from the parking garage, her face wild with desperation. "Don't let her get on that plane," Madison screamed at Amanda through the car window. "She's not thinking clearly. She's having some kind of mental breakdown." Amanda and I exchanged looks. This was beyond manipulation now. This was genuine hysteria. "Madison, you need to step back from the car," Amanda said firmly, rolling down her window just enough to speak. "This is insane. Madison continued, her voice getting shriller. You can't enable this breakdown. She's destroying our family. I got out of the car slowly, keeping my voice calm. Madison, what are you doing here? I'm trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life, she said, tears streaming down her face. Do you understand what you're throwing away? Our relationship, our family, my wedding day? All for some petty revenge trip. It's not revenge, I said quietly. It's choice. I'm choosing to spend my vacation time doing something that makes me happy instead of something that makes me miserable. You're being selfish and vindictive, she sobbed. This is my wedding, Rebecca. My one special day, and you're ruining it with this tantrum. How is my absence ruining your wedding? I asked genuinely. You didn't want me in your wedding party. You excluded me from your bachelorette party. You planned to seat me at the kids' table and exclude me from family photos. How does my not being there change any of your plans? Madison's face went white as she realized I knew about the seating arrangement and photo exclusion. For a moment, she looked genuinely ashamed. Then the shame turned to rage. You don't deserve to be in those photos, she hissed. All you do is sulk and play victim. Do you know how exhausting it is to constantly manage your feelings? Do you know what it's like to plan a wedding while worrying that everything might trigger your victim complex? Other travelers were starting to stare. Madison was making a scene in the middle of the airport drop-off zone, blocking traffic and drawing unwanted attention. Madison, you need to leave, I said firmly. I have a flight to catch. I'm not letting you destroy our family, she said, grabbing my arm. You're coming home with me right now. That's when airport security got involved. A uniformed officer approached us, having noticed the commotion. Is there a problem here? He asked. My sister is trying to prevent me from traveling, I said calmly. She's become increasingly agitated and is now physically restraining me. Madison immediately switched tactics, turning to the security officer with tears in her eyes. My sister is having a mental health crisis, she said. She's making irrational decisions, and I'm worried about her traveling alone in this state. The security officer looked between us, clearly trying to assess the situation. I remained calm while Madison continued to escalate. Ma'am, is this woman your legal guardian or power of attorney? The officer asked Madison. No, but she's my sister and she's not thinking clearly. Then she's free to travel wherever she chooses, he said firmly. I'm going to need you to step back and allow her to proceed to check in. When Madison refused to move, continuing to block my path and grab at my luggage, the officer called for backup. 2 additional security personnel arrived and formally escorted Madison away from the departure area, warning her that any attempt to re-enter the secure zone would result in arrest. Watching my sister being led away by security, crying and screaming about family loyalty, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. This was who she really was when she didn't get her way, a manipulative, controlling person who would use any tactic to maintain power over others. The flight to Prague was the most liberating experience of my adult life. As the plane lifted off from Denver International Airport, I felt physically lighter, like I was shedding years of accumulated toxicity and guilt. For the first time in decades, I was going somewhere because I wanted to go, not because someone else expected me to be there. During the layover in Chicago, I briefly turned on my phone to check for any urgent messages. My voicemail was full, mostly from family members expressing varying degrees of outrage and disappointment. Dad's message was cold fury. I hope you're happy with yourself. You've destroyed this family for your own selfish purposes. Mom's message was manipulative victim playing. I don't understand how we raised a daughter who could be so cruel. Your sister is heartbroken, absolutely heartbroken. I hope whatever you find in Prague is worth losing your family forever. But there were also messages of support. Amanda had sent photos from the wedding chaos she was hearing about through mutual friends. Apparently, several guests had asked where I was, and Madison had been forced to explain my absence. According to Amanda's sources, Madison's explanation that I was having personal issues had backfired when people started asking if I was okay and whether they should reach out to me. My Aunt Patricia, Mom's sister who I rarely spoke to, had left a surprising message. Rebecca, honey, I heard about what happened with the wedding tickets. I want you to know that some of us remember what really happened at that family dinner. Your mother called me crying about your breakdown, but I know manipulation when I see it. Have a wonderful time in Prague. You deserve happiness. When I landed in Prague 12 hours later, stepping off the plane into the crisp European air, I felt like I was being born again. The city was even more beautiful than the photos had suggested, with its stunning architecture and cobblestone streets, creating a fairy tale atmosphere that felt like the perfect backdrop for a new chapter of my life. The hostel was exactly what I'd hoped for: clean, safe, and full of other solo travelers eager to explore the city. My roommates were a teacher from Australia taking a gap year, a recent graduate from Canada exploring Europe before starting her career, and a digital nomad from New Zealand who'd been traveling for 3 years. Within hours of checking in, I was part of a group planning to explore Prague Castle the next day. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who were interested in me as an individual, not as a supporting character in someone else's story. They asked about my interests, my travel plans, my thoughts about the places we visited. No one expected me to manage their emotions or validate their choices. No one treated my opinions as inherently less valuable than theirs. Back home, according to the updates I was getting from Amanda, the wedding was becoming the disaster I'd predicted it would be without me there to blame. Madison was reportedly having multiple meltdowns per day, upset that people kept asking about my absence and that the family photos looked incomplete. Several relatives had apparently made comments about the family's treatment of me, forcing my parents to defend their actions publicly. The irony was perfect. They'd excluded me to avoid dealing with my drama, but my absence was creating far more drama than my presence ever had. My first morning in Prague began with something I hadn't experienced in years: genuine excitement about the day ahead. The hostel common room was buzzing with conversation as travelers shared maps and recommendations over coffee and pastries. My roommates from the night before had invited me to join their walking tour of the old town, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, I was part of a group where I actually belonged. Sarah from Australia was studying medieval history and could explain the significance of every building we passed. Emma from Canada was a photographer who helped me capture the perfect shot of the astronomical clock. Maya from New Zealand had been to Prague twice before and knew all the hidden gems that tourists usually missed. We spent the morning exploring narrow cobblestone streets, admiring Gothic architecture, and sharing stories about our lives back home. What struck me most was how easy it was to connect with these women. There was no underlying tension, no need to watch my words carefully, no fear that anything I said would be twisted into evidence of my character flaws. When I mentioned that I was traveling alone because of family drama, they didn't interrogate me or demand explanations. They simply accepted that I was there by choice and focused on making sure I had an amazing experience. The Prague Castle tour was breathtaking, both for the stunning views of the city and for the realization of how much joy I'd been missing in my life. Standing in the castle gardens, looking out over the red-tiled roofs of the city, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since childhood. This was what it felt like to make choices based on what brought me happiness instead of what would avoid conflict. During lunch at a traditional Czech restaurant, Maya asked me about my family situation. I found myself explaining the whole wedding debacle, expecting judgment or advice about reconciliation. Instead, all 3 women nodded with understanding. My brother excluded me from his wedding because I wouldn't pretend to approve of his abusive girlfriend, Sarah shared. Family loyalty is supposed to go both ways. If they're not loyal to you, you don't owe them loyalty back. I had to go no contact with my parents last year, Emma added. Best decision I ever made. It's amazing how much mental energy you get back when you're not constantly trying to manage toxic relationships. The hardest part is realizing that the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally actually love you very conditionally, Maya said. Once you accept that, it becomes easier to choose yourself. These women understood something my family never had, that love shouldn't require you to diminish yourself. That healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. That choosing your own well-being over someone else's dysfunction isn't selfish, it's necessary. That evening, I finally checked my phone properly for the first time since leaving Denver. The messages were overwhelming in their volume and intensity. Madison had sent dozens of texts, progressing from anger to manipulation to what appeared to be genuine panic. Mom had left increasingly dramatic voicemails about the destruction I was causing. Dad's messages were coldly furious, detailing all the ways I was damaging the family reputation. But there were also revelations that changed everything I thought I knew about my family dynamics. Jennifer, my boss, had sent me a detailed email about another call from Madison, this one even more unhinged than the first. "Your sister called again today," Jennifer wrote, this time claiming that you had stolen money from the family to pay for your trip. When I informed her that your travel arrangements were none of my business and that I would not be discussing your personal life with family members, she became increasingly agitated. She accused me of enabling your breakdown and demanded that I force you to return home immediately. "I've documented this call and want to assure you that your job is completely secure. However, I am concerned about the level of harassment you're experiencing." Amanda had forwarded me screenshots from Facebook that revealed how badly the wedding narrative was falling apart. Multiple family friends had commented on Mom's posts about ungrateful children, asking if I was okay and expressing concern about why I wasn't at Madison's wedding. When Mom tried to explain that I was going through some personal issues, people began reaching out to me directly to check on my well-being. But the most shocking revelation came from my Aunt Patricia, who sent me a long email that completely reframed my understanding of my family's history. "Rebecca," she wrote, "your mother called me in tears about your abandonment of the family, and I've reached my breaking point with this manipulation. I need you to know some things that your parents have hidden from you for years. When you were 12 and didn't receive an invitation to Madison's birthday party, it wasn't an oversight. Your mother deliberately excluded you because she thought you got too much attention when both of you were at the same events. When you were 16 and forgot to get graduation announcements, your parents never ordered them because they said your graduation wasn't as important as Madison's upcoming wedding planning. I've watched them systematically exclude you from family events for over 2 decades, always with convenient excuses, always making it seem like accidents or misunderstandings. But I was there for many of the planning conversations. I heard them say they needed to manage your expectations and prevent you from overshadowing Madison. The wedding ticket situation is just the latest example of a pattern that started when you were a child. They've been conditioning you to accept scraps of inclusion while giving Madison everything. I stayed silent because I thought it was better to maintain family unity, but I can't watch them destroy you anymore while pretending to be victims. You are not the problem, sweetheart. You have never been the problem. You are the scapegoat they created to make their favoritism seem reasonable." Reading Patricia's email in a Prague cafe, surrounded by the gentle murmur of conversations in multiple languages, I finally understood the full scope of what had been done to me. This wasn't about the wedding tickets. This wasn't about my sensitivity or drama. This was about a systematic campaign to make me believe I was less worthy of love and inclusion than my sister. The pattern Patricia described explained everything: why I always felt like an outsider in my own family, why my accomplishments were minimized while Madison's were celebrated, why I constantly felt like I was walking on eggshells to avoid some undefined offense. They had trained me from childhood to accept less, to be grateful for scraps, to believe that my needs were inherently less important than everyone else's. But sitting in that cafe, thousands of miles away from their manipulation, I could see the truth clearly for the first time. I wasn't the problem. I had never been the problem. I was a convenient target for a family that needed someone to blame for their own dysfunction. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Amanda, calling with updates from home. "You need to hear this," she said, barely containing her excitement. "Madison's wedding is falling apart. 3 different people have told me that she's had multiple public meltdowns because people keep asking where you are. Your absence is literally the main topic of conversation at her wedding." "That's not what I wanted," I said, and I meant it. "I know you didn't want to ruin her wedding," Amanda said. "But this isn't your fault. This is what happens when people build their happiness on other people's misery. When you removed yourself from their drama, They had nothing left to focus on except how empty their victory feels. What do you mean? Think about it, Amanda said. They planned this whole elaborate exclusion, right? They were going to humiliate you and then blame you for being hurt. But you didn't play your part. You didn't beg for inclusion or show up to be their punching bag. You just left. And now they're stuck with the consequences of their choices without having you there to blame for it. As I walked back to the hostel that evening, through Prague's beautifully lit streets, I realized Amanda was right. My family had built their entire dynamic around having me as their scapegoat, their emotional dumping ground, their convenient explanation for everything that went wrong. When I removed myself from that role, their whole system collapsed. They didn't miss me because they loved me. They missed me because they needed someone to blame. By my third day in Prague, I had gained clarity I never thought possible. Surrounded by new friends who treated me with basic human respect, removed from the constant emotional manipulation of my family, I could finally see the situation objectively. What I saw was a pattern of abuse so systematic and long-standing that it had become my normal. I spent a morning in my hostel room, carefully documenting everything I could remember. Patricia's email had opened floodgates of memory, and I began writing down every incident of exclusion, every misunderstanding, every time I'd been made to feel like I was asking for too much by expecting basic inclusion. The list was staggering. Birthday parties where my invitation was lost. Family photos where I was conveniently absent because I was taking too long or in the bathroom. Holiday celebrations where I was assigned to bring paper plates, while Madison brought the centerpiece everyone would remember. Graduations, promotions, accomplishments that were barely acknowledged while Madison's smallest achievements were celebrated with elaborate fanfare. I had evidence now. Screenshots of the group chat mocking me. Email chains where family members coordinated events without including me. Patricia's testimony about conversations where my exclusion was planned. My boss Jennifer's documentation of Madison's harassment calls. Even the timeline of the wedding ticket misunderstanding that showed how carefully orchestrated the whole thing had been. But most importantly, I had something I'd never had before: perspective. Distance from their manipulation allowed me to see that none of this was normal family behavior. Healthy families don't systematically exclude one member. Loving parents don't use their children's ticket money for their other child's dress upgrade. Good people don't mock their relatives in group chats for trusting them. I crafted my response carefully, understanding that this would likely be my only chance to tell my side of the story before they completely controlled the narrative. I wrote a Facebook post that was factual, measured, and impossible to dismiss as drama. I want to address some rumors about why I'm not attending my sister's wedding in Italy. 3 months ago, my parents promised at a family dinner to handle all travel arrangements as a family. I was told not to worry about logistics. 2 weeks before the wedding, I discovered they had booked flights for everyone except me, claiming they assumed I'd handle my own despite their explicit promise. When I asked for clarification, I was told I was being dramatic as usual and that I had misunderstood what was said, despite multiple witnesses to the conversation. The money that was supposedly allocated for my ticket was used to upgrade my sister's wedding dress. I was excluded from the wedding party in favor of a family friend. I was not invited to the bachelorette party. I learned about these arrangements through social media and accidental text forwards, not through family communication. Rather than pay premium prices for last-minute flights to attend an event where I was clearly unwelcome, I chose to use my already approved vacation time for a solo trip to Prague. I'm having a wonderful time in a beautiful city, meeting amazing people, and experiencing the joy of making choices based on what brings me happiness rather than what avoids conflict. I wish my sister all the happiness in the world. I also wish my family had been honest about not wanting me there instead of creating an elaborate setup designed to make me feel excluded and then blame me for feeling excluded. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step away from people who treat your presence as a burden and your absence as a betrayal. The post went viral in ways I never expected. Within hours, dozens of friends and acquaintances were sharing their own stories of family scapegoating and manipulation. People I hadn't spoken to in years commented with support and their own experiences of being excluded by relatives who then played victim when called out. But more importantly, the post forced my family to confront their actions publicly. When friends and community members saw the factual account of what had happened, many began questioning the narrative my parents had been spreading about my breakdown and selfishness. Mrs. Rodriguez, Amanda's mother who had fired my father as her accountant, commented, "I've known Rebecca since she was a little girl, and she has always been thoughtful and kind. What you've described, Rebecca, is not miscommunication. It's deliberate cruelty. I'm proud of you for choosing yourself." Several other community members shared similar sentiments. People began sharing their own observations of how my family had treated me over the years, creating a public record of the pattern Patricia had described. My family's damage control was swift and desperate. Mom posted her own response within hours, painting herself as a heartbroken mother whose mentally unstable daughter was spreading lies for attention. Dad shared articles about adult children who can't take responsibility for their actions. Madison posted photos from Italy with captions about being surrounded by people who truly love and support her. But their counter-narrative was falling apart under public scrutiny. When Mom claimed in the comments that they never promised to buy Rebecca's ticket, multiple people who had been at that family dinner contradicted her account. When Dad insisted that the money was never specifically allocated for my travel, Patricia commented with details about the conversations she'd witnessed. The most damaging revelation came from an unexpected source, Michael's wife Kate. Apparently, she'd had too much wine while scrolling through Facebook and decided to set the record straight in a comment that she quickly deleted, but not before several people screenshotted it. Everyone needs to stop pretending this is about miscommunication. The family group chat is called Italy Planning, and Rebecca was never added to it. We all knew she didn't have a ticket because we all participated in planning a trip without her. Madison specifically said she didn't want Rebecca in the wedding party because she brings down the energy. Stop acting like this is some misunderstanding when we all know exactly what happened. Kate's accidental confession confirmed everything I'd written and more. It proved that the entire family had actively participated in my exclusion while maintaining the pretense that it was accidental. It showed that Madison's rejection of me as maid of honor wasn't about choosing a close friend, it was about deliberately excluding me. Within 24 hours of Kate's comment going public, the tide of opinion had completely shifted. People who had initially supported my family's narrative began questioning their version of events. Community members who had known our family for years started sharing their own observations about the favoritism and exclusion they'd witnessed. My father's business suffered immediate consequences. 3 more clients canceled their contracts, explicitly citing concerns about his character and judgment. The local Chamber of Commerce received multiple complaints about his membership. His reputation as a trustworthy community leader was crumbling as people realized that someone who could systematically abuse his own daughter probably couldn't be trusted in professional relationships either. Madison's wedding photos, posted from Italy, told their own story. Instead of joyful family celebration, they showed a bride who looked stressed and unhappy. The family photos looked incomplete and awkward, with obvious gaps where someone should have been standing. Several guests had commented asking where I was, forcing Madison to respond publicly that I was dealing with personal issues. But the comments on her wedding photos revealed how badly their narrative was failing. Instead of sympathetic responses about my breakdown, people were questioning why a loving family would exclude someone and then blame them for being excluded. Some guests who were at the wedding were commenting with concern about the family drama that had overshadowed what should have been a happy occasion. The most satisfying moment came when I received a message from Sarah Coleman, Madison's maid of honor. She had apparently been following the Facebook drama and was horrified to learn the truth about my exclusion. "Rebecca, I had no idea about any of this," she wrote. "Madison told me you declined to be in the wedding party because you were too busy with work to handle the responsibilities. She said you were happy that I was stepping in. I would never have accepted if I'd known you were being excluded. This is so messed up, and I'm really sorry I was unknowingly part of it." Even Madison's closest friend was backing away from her when confronted with the truth. The web of lies my family had constructed was unraveling as people learned what had really happened. I spent my evening in Prague at a rooftop bar with my hostel friends, watching the sunset over the city's stunning skyline and reading messages of support from people I'd forgotten cared about me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt what it was like to have people in my corner, supporting my choices instead of questioning my motives. "You look different," Maya observed as we shared a bottle of Czech wine. "Different how?" I asked. "Lighter," she said. "Like you've been carrying something heavy for a really long time and finally put it down." She was right. I had been carrying the weight of their dysfunction, their expectations, their need for a scapegoat. And I had finally, definitively, put it down. Returning to Denver after a week in Prague felt like stepping back into a previous life, one that no longer fit me. The woman who had left for Europe was anxious, guilt-ridden, and desperate for family approval. The woman who returned was calm, clear-eyed, and completely done with their manipulation. I had prepared for their attempts to regain control, but the intensity of their desperation still surprised me. Before I'd even collected my luggage from the baggage claim, my phone was buzzing with messages demanding to know when I'd be home so we could talk. I turned it off and enjoyed the peaceful drive back to my apartment with Amanda, who had insisted on picking me up from the airport. "How do you feel?" she asked as we drove through familiar streets that somehow looked different to me now. "Free," I said, and I meant it. For the first time in my life, I feel completely free. "They've been losing their minds while you were gone," Amanda told me. "Your Facebook post completely changed the narrative. People are seeing them for what they really are now." The ambush attempt came the next morning. I was barely awake, still adjusting to the time difference, when loud knocking interrupted my coffee. Through the peephole, I could see Mom, Dad, and Madison standing in my hallway, clearly prepared for confrontation. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "What can I do for you?" "We need to talk," Dad said, his voice carrying the authority he'd always used to control family discussions. "This situation has gone far enough." "I agree," I said calmly. "It went far enough when you excluded me from my sister's wedding and then blamed me for being excluded." "Stop playing victim," Mom interjected. "You embarrassed this entire family with your social media tantrum. You made Madison's wedding about yourself with your drama." "Actually, Madison's wedding was about Madison," I replied. "Which is exactly how it should have been. I wasn't there to make it about anything." Madison stepped forward, her face blotchy with anger and tears. "You ruined everything," she hissed. "Do you know what it was like trying to explain your absence to people? Do you know how humiliating it was to have guests asking where you were?" "You could have told them the truth," I suggested. "That you didn't want me there and arranged for me not to be included." "That's not what happened," Dad snapped. "You're rewriting history to make yourself look like a victim." "Kate already confirmed what really happened in her Facebook comment," I said. "The whole community knows about the group chat you excluded me from and the deliberate planning that went into leaving me out." The mention of Kate's public confession made all three of them flinch. That had been their biggest mistake, underestimating how alcohol and guilt might lead to truth-telling. "Kate was drunk and confused," Mom said quickly. "She didn't understand the situation." "She understood it perfectly," I replied. "She understood it because she participated in it." Madison tried a different approach, her voice switching to the manipulative sweetness she used when anger didn't work. "Rebecca, I know you're hurt, but we're family. We love you. Can't we work this out?" "Love isn't what you think it is," I said quietly. "Love doesn't involve systematic exclusion. Love doesn't involve mocking someone in group chats. Love doesn't involve using someone's ticket money for your dress upgrade. What you're describing isn't love, it's control." Dad's mask slipped entirely. "You ungrateful little dash," he started, his voice rising to the level that used to terrify me as a child. "Don't," I said firmly, cutting him off. "Don't you dare try to intimidate me anymore. I'm 34 years old, and I'm done being afraid of your anger." "You're destroying this family," Mom said, tears starting to flow. "Your father's business is suffering because of your lies. People are questioning our character because of your vindictive social media posts." "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "I simply told the truth about what happened." If the truth is destroying your reputation, maybe you should examine your actions, not blame me for exposing them. Madison made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. I'm pregnant, she announced suddenly. I just found out. I need my sister right now. For a split second, I felt the old familiar pull of obligation and guilt. Then I remembered Kate's deleted Facebook comment and realized this was likely another lie designed to manipulate me back into compliance. Congratulations, I said simply. I'm sure you and James will be wonderful parents. That's it? Madison's voice cracked with disbelief. Your sister tells you she's pregnant and that's all you have to say? What would you like me to say? I asked. Would you like me to pretend that this announcement erases years of systematic exclusion? Would you like me to act grateful that you're finally giving me a role in your life again? I want you to act like my sister, she sobbed. I've been trying to act like your sister for 34 years, I replied. You've made it clear that's not a role you want me to play. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with them cycling through every manipulation tactic they'd ever used: guilt, anger, fake concern, false promises, and outright lies. But something had fundamentally changed in me during my week in Prague. I could see their tactics clearly now, and they had no power over me anymore. When they finally realized I wasn't going to be manipulated back into their dysfunction, Dad delivered what he thought would be the ultimate threat. If you continue down this path, he said coldly, you will no longer be part of this family. You will be cut off completely, financially, emotionally, socially. Is your petty revenge worth losing everything? I'm not losing everything, I said quietly. I'm losing people who treat me terribly and call it love. That's not a loss, it's liberation. They left my apartment that day looking confused and defeated. For the first time in their lives, their manipulation hadn't worked. I hadn't crumbled under their pressure or begged for their forgiveness. I had simply stood my ground and refused to accept their version of reality. Later that week, I learned through Amanda that Madison's pregnancy announcement had been false, just as I'd suspected. She'd apparently confessed to her friend Sarah that she'd made it up to see if Rebecca still cared about the family. When Sarah expressed horror at using a fake pregnancy for manipulation, Madison had broken down crying, admitting that she didn't know how to fix the situation she'd created. The legal documentation I filed wasn't about punishment, it was about protection. After weeks of harassment, workplace interference, and escalating manipulation attempts, I needed official records of their behavior. The restraining order application included Jennifer's documentation of Madison's workplace harassment, screenshots of threatening messages, and testimony from neighbors about Madison's disruptive visits to my apartment building. My boss Jennifer had been incredibly supportive throughout the entire ordeal. She banned any family members from contacting the office and assured me that their attempts to interfere with my employment had only strengthened her confidence in my professionalism. The way someone's family treats them says nothing about their character, she told me. But the way they handle family dysfunction says everything about their strength and judgment. You've handled this with more grace and maturity than anyone should have to. The friend circle revelations were perhaps the most painful part of this entire experience. As the truth came out publicly, multiple friends admitted they'd witnessed my family's treatment of me for years, but had stayed silent because they didn't want to get involved or thought it wasn't their place. Amanda was furious on my behalf. How many people watched your family exclude you and said nothing? How many people saw you being treated like garbage and decided it was easier to pretend they didn't notice? But I wasn't angry anymore. I understood that people avoid confronting dysfunction because it makes them uncomfortable. What mattered was that I had finally confronted it myself. The decision to go completely no contact wasn't made in anger or spite. It was made from a place of clarity and self-preservation. I blocked their numbers, unfriended them on social media, and returned any mail to sender. I wasn't doing this to punish them. I was doing it to protect myself. My chosen family expanded to include Patricia, who had apologized for years of silence and wanted to maintain a relationship based on honesty and respect. Amanda remained my closest confidant, the friend who had supported my liberation from the beginning. The international friends I'd made in Prague stayed in touch, planning future adventures, and offering perspective from people who understood the courage it takes to choose yourself over toxic family expectations. For the first time in my adult life, I was surrounded by people who valued my presence instead of treating it as an obligation to be managed. 6 months later, sitting in my therapist's office for what had become a weekly ritual of healing and self-discovery, I could barely recognize the woman I used to be. Dr. Sarah Martinez had helped me understand that what I'd experienced wasn't just family conflict, it was systematic emotional abuse designed to maintain a family hierarchy where I would always be less important than everyone else. Scapegoating is one of the most insidious forms of family abuse, she explained during one of our early sessions. It's designed to make the victim believe they're the problem while protecting the real dysfunction in the system. Your family needed you to be wrong so they could avoid examining what was actually broken about their relationships. The therapy wasn't easy. Decades of conditioning don't disappear overnight, and I had to constantly challenge the voice in my head that insisted I was being selfish or overdramatic. But with professional support and the perspective I'd gained, I slowly began to separate my actual personality from the distorted version my family had created to justify their treatment of me. My career transformation was perhaps the most surprising development. Without the constant emotional drain of managing family dysfunction, I had energy and focus I'd forgotten I possessed. Jennifer had recommended me for a promotion to senior marketing director, citing my exceptional resilience and professional judgment under pressure as key qualifications. The new position came with responsibilities I'd never imagined having. Leading a team of 12 people, developing strategies for major clients, traveling to conferences where my expertise was valued and sought after. For the first time in my life, I was being recognized for my actual abilities instead of being diminished to make someone else feel superior. My relationship with travel had been completely transformed by that week in Prague. What had started as an act of defiance had become a passion for exploration and adventure. I'd since visited Barcelona with Amanda, taken a solo trip to Iceland that challenged every assumption I'd ever had about my own courage, and was planning a month-long adventure through Southeast Asia. Each trip reinforced the lesson I'd learned in Prague. The world was full of people who would treat me with kindness and respect if I gave them the chance. I'd made friends in 6 different countries, people who knew nothing about my family history but liked me for exactly who I was. The creative awakening had been unexpected but profound. Away from constant criticism and judgment, I'd rediscovered passions that had been buried for years. I'd started writing again, something I'd loved in college but abandoned when every story I shared was met with dismissive comments about being too sensitive or too dramatic. My blog about solo travel and family recovery had gained a following I never expected, with hundreds of people sharing their own stories of choosing themselves over toxic relationships. I'd received messages from people all over the world who were struggling with similar family dynamics, finding courage in my story to set their own boundaries. The photography hobby that had started with capturing Prague's beauty had evolved into something approaching professional skill. My travel photos had been featured in several online publications, and I was considering a side business in travel photography that could eventually become a career change. Amanda had become more than my best friend. She'd become the sister I'd always wanted. Our friendship had deepened as I learned what healthy relationships actually looked like. We supported each other's goals without competition, celebrated each other's successes without resentment, and offered comfort during difficulties without judgment. You know what I love most about who you've become? Amanda said during one of our regular coffee dates. You finally believe you deserve good things. For years, I watched you settle for scraps and convince yourself you should be grateful. Now you expect to be treated well, and it shows in every area of your life. Patricia had become an unexpected source of wisdom and family history. Through her, I'd learned that the favoritism toward Madison had started when she was born, with my parents treating her as the miracle baby they'd wanted after years of trying. I'd apparently been seen as a disappointment from birth. Not because of anything I'd done, but because I wasn't the child they'd specifically hoped for. Your mother always said Madison was special, Patricia told me during one of our monthly lunch dates. She convinced your father that Madison needed extra attention and protection because she was more sensitive than you. It was all projection, of course. Your mother was the one who was fragile and needed constant validation. The support network I'd built was everything my biological family had never been. These were people who checked on me when I was stressed, celebrated my victories without making them about themselves, and offered help without expecting something in return. They treated my happiness as important instead of seeing it as a threat to their own. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I still struggled with guilt about my choices, wondering if I should have tried harder to fix relationships that were fundamentally broken. But therapy had taught me that healing from family trauma isn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. It's about accepting that some people are incapable of healthy relationships and protecting yourself from further harm. Dr. Martinez helped me understand that my family's attempts to contact me, which still happened occasionally through flying monkeys and third parties, weren't expressions of love or desire for reconciliation. They were attempts to reestablish control over someone who had escaped their system. Healthy families celebrate members who become independent and confident, she explained. Dysfunctional families punish independence because it threatens the power structure they've created. Your growth threatens their ability to maintain the narrative that you are the problem. The wisdom I'd gained from my experience had made me a resource for friends and colleagues dealing with their own family challenges. I'd learned to recognize the signs of scapegoating, gaslighting, and emotional manipulation, and I could help others see these patterns in their own relationships. 3 different friends had made significant changes in their family dynamics after conversations with me. One had set boundaries with a controlling mother. Another had ended a relationship with a sibling who consistently treated her poorly. A third had chosen to skip a family reunion where she was always made to feel unwelcome. You gave me permission to choose myself, one friend told me. I didn't even realize that was an option until I saw you do it. The peace I'd achieved wasn't the absence of conflict, it was the presence of authenticity. I no longer spent energy trying to manage other people's emotions or walking on eggshells to avoid imaginary offenses. I could be genuinely myself in every relationship because I'd surrounded myself with people who appreciated that authenticity. Looking back on that moment in my Denver apartment when I discovered my family had forgotten to book my plane tickets, I could see it clearly now as the catalyst I'd needed to finally break free from a lifetime of conditioning. They'd pushed their manipulation too far, made their cruelty too obvious, forced me to choose between my dignity and their dysfunction. I chose my dignity, and in doing so, I chose a life I'd never imagined was possible. A life where my presence was valued, my opinions mattered, my happiness was celebrated instead of resented. A life where I was surrounded by people who treated me like family without requiring me to sacrifice my self-worth in return. The lesson I'd learned wasn't complicated, but it had taken me 34 years to understand. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who claim to love you, but treat you like you're disposable. Family isn't about blood or obligation or shared history. Family is about respect, support, and genuine care. I'd booked a hostel in Prague instead of a flight to my sister's wedding, but what I'd really booked was my freedom. And it was the best reservation I ever made. Thank you all so much for joining me on this incredible journey of family recovery and personal liberation. Your support and engagement mean the world to me, and I hope this story has resonated with those of you who might be dealing with similar family dynamics. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own well-being? How did you find the courage to set boundaries with people you love? What advice would you give to someone struggling with toxic family relationships? Don't forget to hit that like button if this story spoke to you, and please subscribe for more authentic stories about choosing yourself over dysfunction. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better than settling for scraps of love from people who should be celebrating them. Remember, you are worthy of relationships that build you up instead of tearing you down. You deserve to be surrounded by people who treat your happiness as important, not threatening. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who make you feel small and find your tribe among those who help you feel like you can fly. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, Keep setting boundaries and keep believing that you deserve all the love and respect the world has to offer. Take care, everyone.